Vera froze in the doorway. In the hallway stood a pair of unfamiliar women's boots, and suspicious noises echoed from the bedroom. A cliched scene, depicted in countless TV shows and books. Only Vera never imagined it could happen to her. With legs that barely moved, she approached the bedroom and opened the door. Her suspicions were confirmed. Dennis, her common-law husband, was entertaining a long-legged woman with a cascade of red hair in their bed. A lump formed in her throat, threatening to erupt into desperate sobs. But Vera decided not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her tears. She turned around and left, slamming the door behind her. Rushing out of the building, she gasped for air, struggling to calm herself. It wasn't working. Tears burned her cheeks. How could he? She asked aloud. A passerby even turned around, thinking she was addressing him. Vera quickly walked away from the place she had long called home. I'll get my things tomorrow or another day, she thought, slightly calmer. Deep down, she already knew she would never return. Wrapping herself in a warm scarf, she hurried to the nearest cafe as a fierce snowstorm began outside. Dark snow clouds loomed, and the wind was so piercing it chilled her to the bone. Entering the cafe, Vera realized with horror that she had left her bag behind. She managed to find enough change in her pocket for a cup of coffee. No money, no loved one, she thought sadly, sipping the aromatic coffee. Thankfully, she had her phone in her pocket, otherwise she would have been completely disconnected. As she warmed up, a waiter informed her that the cafe was about to close. Vera shivered, looking out the window. The snowstorm was raging. This year, winter was exceptionally snowy and cold. She couldn't go home. She didn't want to face the man who had betrayed her. Besides her phone, she found a set of keys in her pocket, one of which was to her office door. With a plan in mind, Vera hurried to the publishing house where she had worked for several years. Who's there? Asked the elderly security guard. Oh, Veronica! Sorry, old man, I didn't recognize you. But what brings you here so late? Uncle Misha, can I stay the night in my office? Vera asked, her voice trembling from the cold. Michael Petrovich had worked as a security guard at their publishing house for several years. He was a kind and cheerful old man, loved by all the employees who simply called him Uncle Misha. Of course, Veronica! He exclaimed. How could I leave you out in the cold? Come in. I'll put the kettle on. You're shivering, you might catch a cold. Vera opened her office, took off her coat, and sipped the herbal tea Uncle Misha had prepared. She cherished her job. Dennis was a co-owner of the publishing house, but she didn't know who owned the other half. Dennis disliked discussing such matters. He once mentioned that he started the publishing house with a friend who later sold his share to some big businessman. But Dennis effectively ran the place alone. Vera, a journalism graduate, joined Dennis's team and eventually became the chief editor. She quickly earned respect and admiration from her colleagues, often taking on Dennis's responsibilities and more. She always strove to support her husband in every way. Although Dennis never proposed, she genuinely considered them a family, viewing a marriage certificate as an unnecessary formality. That's it, Vera, it's all over, she said aloud, nervously laughing. The man you thought was the love of your life turned out to be a traitor. The image of his betrayal kept flashing before her eyes. Locking the door, Vera finally let her emotions out. She cried half the night, barely sleeping, only dozing off toward morning in her office chair. She woke up to noise in the reception area. Someone was knocking loudly on the door. Open up, Vera! Open up! Dennis shouted. Her heart raced. She didn't want to open the door, but she knew she had to. Vera opened it and turned to the window. Dennis entered, leaving the door open behind him, even though employees were arriving for work. Why didn't you stay home last night? He asked. Vera silently looked out the window, afraid he would see her tears. No way, I won't give him that satisfaction, she thought. Clenching her fists until her nails dug into her skin, she turned to face Dennis with a composed expression. I didn't want to disturb your important business, Denis Vladimirovich. Dennis stared at her brazenly, But what shocked Vera was the complete lack of remorse or guilt in his eyes. Instead, he smirked and replied, "Don't get so worked up, Veronica. I'm a man, and I can't wait for you to find time for me. You're always tired, working, or something else. What do you expect me to do? Are you saying it's my fault you brought some girl into our home?" Vera struggled to breathe. She had expected anything but this twisted logic. She decided to end the conversation and tried to leave, but Dennis pinned her against the wall. "Where do you think you're going? You think I'll just let you walk away?" he sneered. "Let go, Dennis. It's over. I don't want to see you anymore." Vera tried to free herself from his grip but couldn't. "Have you thought this through, Veronica?" he asked angrily. "You're nothing without me. Remember where I found you. Want to go back to that miserable life? No one in this city will give you a job without me." Vera remained silent, trying not to cry. She had no family left. Dennis was the closest person she had. Her parents died when she was very young, and her grandmother, who raised her, had recently passed away. He knew how hard she took that loss, and now he was using it against her. "I'm sorry I never saw you for who you really are," Vera said. Feeling his grip loosen slightly, she broke free and ran away, unable to hold back her sobs any longer. A vast, dark emptiness filled her soul, leaving her feeling utterly hopeless. After running a safe distance from the publishing house, Vera stopped. Her thoughts were a jumbled mess. How would she live now? What should she do? Her familiar life was shattered, and she had to move out of Dennis's apartment. The thought of returning for her things was terrifying. What if she saw him again? That was the last thing she wanted. Sighing heavily, she wiped away her tears and slowly walked along the street, passing shops and cafes. She decided to return for her belongings later, once she had calmed down. Vera tried to make sense of her life. Where had she gone wrong? Why had Dennis started cheating on her? She had felt his love, but recently, he had changed. He was often irritable and rude, constantly staying late at work. Now she realized that must have been when he started seeing other women. The thought brought fresh tears to her eyes. As she passed a flower shop, Vera paused, watching men select bouquets. It was one of the city's finest flower shops. Glancing at her reflection in the window, she saw a sad girl with tear-stained, lifeless eyes and smudged mascara. Turning away, she hurried off, lost in her thoughts and oblivious to her surroundings. At that moment, a man exited the shop with a large basket of white roses. Vera, not looking where she was going, collided with him, scattering some of the flowers and falling to the ground. "Watch where you're going!" the man exclaimed, but he still offered his hand to help her up. As he touched her, Vera experienced something she had tried to forget since childhood. Her lungs burned, her head spun, and her chest felt like it was on fire. She couldn't stand up. Her body felt limp, and her limbs wouldn't respond. Images flashed through her mind. She saw the man standing next to her engulfed in flames in a black car with the license plate number 545. The fire seemed to consume him. He screamed in agony. Feeling his pain as her own, the girl lost consciousness. When she came to, the first thing she saw was the concerned face of the man from her vision. "Good heavens, you scared me! You need to go to the hospital. Let me call you a taxi," the man said with a friendly smile. "I would take you myself, but I can't. I'm in a hurry." He pulled out his phone to dial a cab. "Please stay home tomorrow. You're in danger," Vera whispered. "You must have hit your head. You really should see a doctor," the stranger insisted. "No, I'm fine." Vera stood up and realized she was on a bench at a bus stop. "He must have carried me here when I fainted," she thought. The man shrugged and headed towards a black car parked nearby, with the license plate number 545. "Wait!" Vera shouted, rushing towards him. The man turned to face her. Grabbing his arm, Vera pleaded, "I know this sounds crazy, but please listen to me. You must not drive that car tomorrow. I beg you, your life is in danger." The man smiled, clearly bewildered. "You should go home, miss. You're overtired, he said, turning away and getting into the car. Vera sighed heavily. He didn't believe her. She couldn't blame him. She would have thought the same if she didn't know about her gift. Trying to gather her thoughts, she headed towards Dennis's house to collect her belongings. She had a small apartment on the outskirts of the city that she rented out. She decided to call her tenants and inform them she needed the place back. Though she felt terrible about evicting them, especially since they were good tenants who always paid on time, she needed a place to stay. The tenants begged for more time, offering to pay an extra month's rent, as they had recently had a baby. Vera agreed, as the money would be helpful. As she approached the house she had shared with Dennis for years, her heart grew heavier. She tried the key in the lock, but it wouldn't turn. She checked again, confirming it was the right key. Dennis had changed the locks. Vera sat on the steps and cried quietly. How could he do this? I didn't cheat on him. He cheated on me. She waited for Dennis until late at night, but he never showed up. Exhausted and heartbroken, she decided to go to work. Michael Petrovich was on duty again, and she knew he wouldn't turn her away. Arriving at the publishing house, Vera was exhausted. She knocked, and Michael Petrovich opened the door, looking apologetic. Vera, I've been told not to let you in anymore. I'm sorry. Did Dennis order this? Vera asked, her voice trembling. Yes, he did. After you left, he went crazy, yelling at everyone. He's looking for your replacement. Michael sighed heavily. I don't know what happened between you two, but I can't leave you out in the cold. Come in, stay in my room tonight, and decide what to do in the morning. Thank you, Uncle Misha, Vera replied, sniffling. Her head was pounding, and her heart ached with pain and injustice. But she fell asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. She woke up to the sound of voices and sunlight streaming in. Quickly freshening up, she headed to her office. To her surprise, the door was open. She hurriedly gathered her things, especially her laptop. As she was about to leave, Dennis stormed in. What are you doing here? Who let you in? You're fired, he hissed. I'm just here to get my things and my final paycheck. I won't bother you again, Vera replied calmly. The man before her barely resembled the one she had loved. Get out and leave your stuff, Dennis shouted. Curious colleagues peeked into the office, but he didn't care. These are my personal belongings, including my laptop. Don't be ridiculous, Dennis, Vera retorted, clutching her bag. Enraged, Dennis raised his hand to strike her, but the secretary intervened. Dennis Vladimirovich, the boss is here and waiting for you in his office, she said. You're lucky, Dennis snarled at Vera. Now get out. I don't know why you're acting this way. Maybe it's karma for my loyalty and love. But remember, what goes around comes around. The pain you've caused me will come back to haunt you, Vera shouted, rushing out of the office in tears. Oleg, I'm so tired of it all, Oleg sighed, sitting in his luxurious leather chair across from his friend Ilya. It feels like I'm suffocating from despair. Come on, man, don't exaggerate. Anyone would envy you. Stable business, income, beautiful girls, Ilya replied, smiling. Look at Marina, she's gorgeous. You're right. But it hasn't brought me happiness in a long time. I crave genuine, sincere relationships. These girls, including Marina, only care about my money, Oleg said, gazing out the window. Well, not just your money, Ilya laughed. You've been popular since school. Always the handsome one. Oleg stood up and walked to the panoramic window in his office. That's true. He had always been desired by women, and his wealth only amplified that. His office was in the city's largest business center, with a stunning view, a requirement for him. Deep down, Oleg was a romantic, though he hid it to avoid being seen as weak. In business, strength and toughness were crucial. Oleg owned a major media conglomerate, including top publishing houses and TV channels. I met a strange girl today while buying flowers for Marina, he said softly, still looking out the window. And? Was she so gorgeous that she blew your mind? Ilya asked, grinning. It's not that. I didn't even get a good look at her. But her words haunt me. She begged me not to drive tomorrow, saying my life was in danger. Ilya laughed. Sounds like you're losing it, buddy. Believing in fortune tellers now? Besides, we have important meetings tomorrow, remember? I remember. Oleg waved him off. We also need to visit that publishing house we acquired 2 years ago. Are there complaints about it? Rumors say the manager there has gone off the rails, embezzling money. We need to sort it out. The friends said their goodbyes, and Oleg headed home. Marina greeted him at the door, throwing her arms around his neck. I'm so glad you're home. I missed you all day, she cooed, kissing him. Marina, stop. I'm tired, Oleg said, pushing her away. You're such a bore, Oleg. Why do I even love you? Marina pouted. Do you really love me? Oleg asked, looking into her eyes. What do you mean? Marina snapped, growing angry. You're never satisfied, always tired, like an old man. Oleg turned and walked towards his room but stopped and said, I'm not keeping anyone here against their will. If you're unhappy, you know where the door is. As the door slammed behind him, Marina was already on the phone, complaining to her father. Oleg lay motionless on his bed, reflecting on his life. He remembered his childhood with his mother, a time he cherished as the happiest in his life. They lived in a provincial town far from the bustling metropolis. The father had left to conquer Moscow, aiming to make money, and never returned. The mother worried a lot but managed to raise her son to be a true man. When Oleg graduated from high school, his father suddenly reappeared and offered to move to the city for his education, promising a good job afterward. As Oleg later understood, his father's second family hadn't worked out. With no other children, he remembered his own son. By then, the father was quite wealthy and wanted to involve his only son in his business. Oleg didn't want to leave his mother alone and resented his father, but his mother insisted he go. Eventually, Oleg relented. After graduating from university, he started working for his father. As soon as he got on his feet, he distanced himself and started his own business, which thrived with each passing day. His father introduced him to Marina, the daughter of a former prosecutor. Though her family struggled financially after her father's retirement, they had significant connections. Oleg, marry Marina. She's a beauty and really likes you. Her father's connections will open doors for us, Oleg's father enthusiastically advised. Initially, things seemed fine between the young couple until Oleg realized he was merely a sponsor. It was clear they had nothing in common. Friends admired Marina's beauty, but this didn't make Oleg feel better. Lately, she had been hinting at formalizing their relationship, and both sets of parents were pressuring them. Oleg kept delaying the proposal and increasingly considered breaking up. Suddenly, the image of the girl he had met that morning came to mind, and for some reason, these memories made him smile. He called Ilya. Buddy, I need your help. I'm going to see my mother today. I need to get away from it all. Can you go to the meeting tomorrow instead of me? Man, you're really down. Ilya laughed. But how will I get there? My car is still in the shop after the accident. No problem, take mine. I'll take a taxi to my mother's. I haven't seen her in a while and really miss her. Marina was displeased when she learned Oleg was going to see his mother. Oleg, I thought we were going to the club tonight. What's so special about that backwater? That backwater, as you call it, is my hometown, where I was born and have many fond memories. Plus, my closest person lives there, Oleg replied. Maybe I should come with you. After all, we're getting married soon, and I haven't even met your mother. Marina pouted. It's better if you don't. I want to be alone, Oleg said, turning away to call a taxi. He knew his mother wouldn't approve of Marina. She was perceptive and would see there was no love between them. His mother had always taught him to marry for love. Marina pleaded a bit more but eventually left to get ready for the club. Oleg, remembering he had planned to visit one of his publishing houses, decided to go there early in the morning. He struggled to fall asleep, his thoughts racing. It felt like his life was spiraling out of control. Though he had no financial problems, he yearned for someone to love him genuinely and support him. Once, he tried discussing this with his father, who laughed it off. "Son, leave that nonsense to the fools. In our world, only the right calculations bring happiness," his father said. "But didn't you and Mom love each other?" Oleg asked. "We did. And look where it got us," his father replied. "I left you both for a better opportunity. If I hadn't, we'd still be struggling in that small town. Now, thanks to me, you're a successful businessman with everything you want." Oleg barely contained his anger but managed to stay calm. He didn't want to appear weak in his father's eyes. All his life, he had tried to prove he could succeed without his father's help. The start his father gave him was invaluable, so Oleg remained silent. This conversation often resurfaced in Oleg's mind, even now as he lay awake. He finally fell asleep near dawn, only to be awakened by his alarm shortly after. Remembering he had promised his car to Ilya, he called a taxi. 40 minutes later, he entered one of his publishing houses. As he walked in, he heard loud shouting, and a tearful girl rushed past him. It was his recent acquaintance. She didn't even glance at him. "What's going on here?" Oleg asked the secretary. The secretary looked around cautiously before speaking. "Oh, Oleg Sergeyevich, it's a mess. Denis Vladimirovich fired Vera. She was such a wonderful person, honest and kind. The staff doesn't like him." The secretary waited for Oleg's reaction, but he said nothing, determined to deal with Denis Vladimirovich swiftly. Denis arrived a few minutes later. Oleg scrutinized him. "What's happening here, Denis Vladimirovich? You're the director, yet there's no order. I've heard complaints about you," Oleg began. "I don't know who's spreading these rumors, but everything is fine here. Those complaining are either competitors or disgruntled former employees," Denis retorted defiantly. "Precisely. Lately, there's been a high turnover rate. Care to explain?" Oleg asked. Denis was starting to irritate him. "We're weeding out the bad employees, keeping only the best," Denis replied quickly. "I see. Starting tomorrow, there will be an unscheduled inspection of this publishing house," Oleg declared. "You may go." As Denis left, Oleg noticed his visible tension. He made a few calls to the central office, ordering the best specialists to conduct the inspection. Before leaving, he requested Vera's personnel file from HR. Oleg took a taxi to his mother's, stopping by a store to buy everything she needed. The anticipation of seeing his loved one filled him with warmth and joy. The place where he spent his childhood and youth hadn't changed since his last visit. Unfortunately, his busy schedule rarely allowed him to come here. Paying the taxi driver, Oleg stood for a moment outside the 5-story building where he grew up. He had offered to move his mother to a newer, more modern apartment, or even live with him, but she always refused. Taking a deep breath of the frosty air, he smiled and entered the building. Elena Viktorovna was surprised but delighted to see her son. "Is everything okay, son?" she asked cautiously as he enjoyed her cooking. "Everything's fine, Mom," Oleg replied briefly. "I usually let you know before I visit. Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm very happy to see you. You just seem troubled. I'm just tired of the city's hustle and bustle. I miss you and wanted to come home," Oleg said, smiling like a child. Elena Viktorovna didn't press him further, though she sensed something was bothering him. That night, Oleg slept soundly for the first time in ages, waking up late the next morning after turning off his phone. When he turned it back on, messages flooded in as if he had been gone for a month. There were urgent calls from Ilya and messages from Marina, but he decided to deal with them later. Ilya picked up immediately. "Where have you been? Something terrible happened. I thought something happened to you," Ilya shouted. "What happened?" Oleg asked, shocked. It turned out that Oleg's car had been in a terrible accident and was beyond repair. The previous evening, as Ilya was about to run errands for Oleg, he realized he had forgotten important documents at the office. He sent the driver to retrieve them, but the driver got into a fatal crash. Preliminary reports indicated that the car's brakes and fuel tank had been tampered with, causing the vehicle to catch fire. "This wasn't an accident, Oleg. Someone did this on purpose," Ilya said grimly. We were lucky, but the driver wasn't. The young man had recently started his job. Oleg quickly gathered his things and rushed home. Son, you're leaving already? We hardly got to talk, his mother said, tears welling up in her eyes. I have to go, Mom, I'm sorry. I'll come back soon, don't worry. Oleg kissed his mother and hurried to the taxi. 3 days later, the official investigation confirmed his suspicions. Vera. The payout Vera received was meager, despite her significant responsibilities and dedication. She never asked Dennis for a raise, feeling uncomfortable in front of her colleagues who knew they lived together. Vera believed she was contributing significantly to their shared endeavor. She loved her job deeply, though it seemed no one appreciated her efforts. The 2-hour train ride in the cold felt endless. Stepping off at her stop, Vera shivered. The wind cut through her, and the walk ahead was long. Calling a taxi was pointless. No car would venture into the village in such weather. Pulling her scarf higher and tucking her hands into her pockets, she trudged along the barely visible path. She was nearly exhausted when she finally saw the familiar village. Just a little further, she thought, summoning her strength. Suddenly, she heard a strange noise nearby. Turning around, she spotted a figure lying in the snow. Approaching cautiously, she heard a man mumbling. Are you okay? What's wrong? She asked, leaning closer. The man spoke, but Vera couldn't make out his words. Shining her phone's light on his face, she recognized her childhood friend, Sasha, who lived nearby. In their youth, Sasha had confessed his love for her, but later, he had taken a wrong path and started drinking. Vera realized he was heavily intoxicated. She couldn't leave him there to freeze. With no one to call and her phone nearly dead, Vera decided to drag Sasha home. She tore open several bags, tied them together, and used them to pull him across the snow. It took her hours, but she finally managed to get him to his house. Together with Sasha's elderly mother, Sofia Ilyinichna, they carried him inside. After declining Sofia's offer to stay the night, Vera hurried to her own family home. The dilapidated gate and peeling paint spoke of years of neglect. Finding the hidden key, she sighed in relief. Inside, the house was cold and damp. A window was broken, and there was little firewood left, but it would have to do. Vera quickly lit the stove and searched for something to cover the window. Finding only an old piece of linoleum, she made do with what she had. Soon, the house began to warm up. Exhausted, she lay down on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. She woke up to excruciating pain in her hands, which were frostbitten. A knock at the door revealed Sofia Ilyinichna with a basket of food. Verachka, thank you for helping Sasha. Here, I brought you some supplies, the old woman said, setting the basket down. Vera thanked her, grateful for the kindness. As the day wore on, Vera's condition worsened. Her throat hurt, and by evening she had a high fever. With no medicine in the house, she relied on the herbal tea Sofia had brought. The next morning, she felt even worse. Weak and feverish, she drifted in and out of consciousness, dreaming of her grandmother and happier times. Another knock at the door stirred her. Summoning her last bit of strength, she made her way to the door. As she opened it, she collapsed, unable to see who was there. Oleg had been searching for Vera, his recent acquaintance. With no house numbers or street names, he had almost given up hope. An elderly woman directed him to Vera's house, where he found her unconscious. Realizing she needed immediate medical attention, Oleg wrapped her in a warm blanket and carefully placed her in his SUV. He drove her to the hospital, calling ahead to ensure she would be seen right away. A private room, medicine, I'll pay for everything. Please help her, he pleaded with the doctors. As he left the hospital, Oleg couldn't stop thinking about Vera and her situation. He was determined to help her in any way he could. Not every girl would risk her health to save some drunkard, Oleg thought to himself. She's remarkable, touching, and so vulnerable. That's how she seemed to him, even though he barely knew her. Vera, opening her eyes, Vera couldn't understand where she was. It took her a moment to realize she was in a hospital. The room was modern and well maintained, unlike any she had seen before. Her hands were completely bandaged, and then 4 drips stood nearby, administering medication. She had no idea how she had ended up here. A nurse entered the room, smiling gently. You're finally awake. I'll get the doctor. With that, she hurried out. The doctor examined Vera thoroughly, asking many questions about her condition. He was particularly concerned about her hands. Well, Vera, we've managed to stabilize your condition. The pneumonia has been stopped with medication. You'll need to stay under observation until you fully recover, the doctor said before leaving. Vera remained in the room with the nurse, who was changing the 4 bag. Your husband is amazing. He carried you here, made sure you got the best care, and even brought expensive medicine. Any woman would envy you. Plus, he's so handsome. The nurse paused, noticing Vera's serious expression. Husband, you say? Vera was confused. The recent events were a blur, and the idea of Dennis caring for her seemed implausible after everything that had happened. But if not him, then who? The next few days passed in a similar routine: procedures, injections, and medication. A young nurse occasionally brought gifts from Vera's supposed husband, always praising him. Vera was dozing when Oleg entered the room. In just 2 days, Vera looked much better. Her cheeks had regained some color, and her breathing was steady. Oleg learned from the doctor that her hands required extensive treatment. He had taken an interest in her, studying her personnel file from the publishing house and speaking with her colleagues. He wanted to touch her hand but feared startling her. Vera sensed his presence and slowly opened her eyes. You, she whispered. Hi, I'm Oleg. We never formally met, he said with a smile. I'm sorry if I offended you. No, I'm the one who should apologize. I said some crazy things. You must have thought I was insane, Vera replied. Not at all. I owe you my life. I never believed in such things, but your words made me cancel my trip. Your sincerity and persistence touched me. Thank you? Vera was at a loss for words, her breath catching in her chest. His touch felt like an electric shock, reminding her of when she first discovered her abilities as a child. Her grandmother had comforted her then, and the memory made her dizzy. You should rest and not worry, Oleg said gently. Would you like me to read to you? Vera nodded. He sat on the edge of the bed, opened a book, and began to read. Vera didn't focus on the words but found his voice soothing. She studied him discreetly. Today, he looked different from their first encounter. Instead of a suit, he wore jeans and a casual sweater. His dark hair was neatly styled, and he was clean-shaven, with a faint, pleasant scent of cologne. Oleg visited every day. Initially, their conversations were awkward, but they soon began to talk like old friends. They discovered shared interests, views on life, and a similar sense of humor. How did you find me? Vera asked one evening. Oleg chuckled. It's a long story. I had to meet your former director and get your address. You spoke to Dennis? Vera asked in surprise. Yes, but let's not dwell on that, Oleg said, quickly changing the subject. The next morning, the doctor entered Vera's room. Good morning, Vera. You'll be discharged tomorrow. Your test results are good, but your hands aren't healing as quickly as we hoped. We'll refer you to another clinic for further treatment. The news of her impending discharge unsettled Vera. She dreaded returning to an empty house, especially with her injured hands. She knew she couldn't afford the continued treatment Oleg had been paying for. That evening, Oleg didn't visit, leaving Vera feeling anxious and sleepless. The next morning, Vera gathered her few belongings and went to the doctor's office for her discharge papers. As she walked out of the hospital, she heard Oleg's voice. Vera? I thought I'd miss you. He stood there with a bouquet of flowers. I'm sorry I couldn't come yesterday. I had some important matters to attend to. Let's sit and talk. He led her to the hospital cafe, where they sat down. Vera was relieved to see him, feeling a mix of emotions. I spoke with your doctor, Oleg began. You need further treatment, and returning to that house in the village isn't an option. It's barely habitable, and getting to your appointments from there would be impossible. I have a proposal for you. He paused, looking nervous. I have a job offer for you, and you can stay at my place. You're an excellent professional, and I need someone I can trust for an important project. You'll have your own room and workspace, and we'll make sure you get to all your medical appointments. Vera was taken aback. What kind of job? Doing what? She asked, confused. You'll be assisting me with a new project. I can't reveal all the details yet, but I believe in your abilities. I've done my research, and I know you're the right person for this. Please consider it. It's the best solution for your situation. Vera looked into his blue eyes, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. I accept, she finally said. I don't want to part ways with you. Oleg smiled, visibly relieved. Then let's go. They walked to the parking lot, where a dark blue luxury sedan awaited them. I decided to change my image. Oleg laughed, noticing Vera's curious glance. As they drove, the conversation flowed easily, but Oleg grew more serious the closer they got to their destination. He stopped the car at the entrance of a private community. Vera, there's something else I need to tell you. I live with someone, my girlfriend, Marina. This revelation hit Vera like a cold shower. She felt a lump form in her throat and tears well up in her eyes. I understand, she said quietly, trying to hide her disappointment. Marina doesn't understand anything about work, so she won't bother you, Oleg said. Vera nodded silently and turned to the window. Of course, she suspected that a man like Oleg wouldn't be single, but deep down, she had hoped he was. The rest of the journey passed in silence. Parking in front of a large mansion, Oleg took Vera's belongings and gestured for her to follow. Inside, the house was even more spacious than it appeared from the outside. To Vera's surprise, it was quite cozy. She had always imagined such grand homes to be more like museums, devoid of warmth. But here, she was wrong. The staff, consisting of a cook, a maid, and an elderly manager named Victor, greeted them. Your nurse will arrive later with everything you need for your treatment. Make yourself at home, Oleg said with a smile before leaving. Vera sat on the edge of the enormous bed and sighed. The room was tastefully decorated in soft beige tones and had its own bathroom, toilet, and a balcony. There was also a door leading to a small study equipped with everything she needed for work. Vera examined her few belongings and decided she needed to retrieve more from Dennis's place, though she wasn't sure how. Later that evening, the nurse arrived as promised. She tended to Vera's hands and provided the necessary medication. Her professionalism and pleasant demeanor were a comfort to Vera, who had been lacking in companionship. A knock at the door startled her. It was Victor, inviting her to dinner. Vera followed him to the dining room, where Oleg was waiting. He smiled warmly and gestured for her to sit across from him. Can you forgive me? Oleg asked. For what? Vera replied, confused. For nearly starving you, he said with a laugh. Vera chuckled. Fasting is good for you sometimes. You don't need that, Oleg joked, glancing at her figure. Looks like you're having fun. A female voice interrupted. Marina descended the stairs and approached the table. The cheerful atmosphere vanished instantly. She kissed Oleg and turned to Vera. Who is this? Marina demanded. This is Vera, my personal assistant. She'll be staying here for a while due to circumstances. Vera, this is Marina, Oleg introduced. Vera froze, staring at Marina. She had bright red hair and strongly resembled the woman Vera had seen with Dennis. Are you going to bring all your employees home, or is she special? Marina asked snidely. This is my home, and Vera saved my life. I owe her, Oleg replied calmly. I think I'll go to my room. I'm not feeling well, Vera said, excusing herself. As she left, she heard Marina's mocking laughter. Oleg, have you lost your mind? Look at her. She's just a frumpy assistant in silly pajamas. Vera's heart raced as she hurried to her room. She couldn't shake the feeling that Marina was the same woman she had seen with Dennis. Later, dinner was brought to her room. She ate a little and decided to make herself some tea, a habit she shared with her grandmother. Leaving her room, Vera found the kitchen and made her tea. The living room had a large fireplace and a stunning view from the window. She sat on the wide windowsill, enjoying her tea and reminiscing about her grandmother. She remembered introducing Dennis to her and how her grandmother had disapproved. "He's not the one for you, dear. He's rotten inside. You'll regret it," her grandmother had warned. But Vera, blinded by love, hadn't listened. After graduation, she moved in with Dennis and started working at his publishing house, taking on most of his responsibilities. Lost in thought, Vera didn't notice Oleg approaching. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, holding a cup of tea. He was wearing a robe, his damp hair indicating he had just showered. "I couldn't sleep either," he said, sitting next to her. "I love sitting in silence with a cup of tea before bed, thinking and dreaming." "Me too," Vera sighed. "I also love looking at the night sky and the stars. Evenings like this inspire me." Oleg smiled. "You're an amazing woman, Vera. I've never met anyone like you. How did you know I was in danger?" Vera had been expecting this question. "I don't know how it happens. My grandmother had the gift of foresight, and I seem to have inherited it. It's rare, but my visions always mean change." "Thank you," Oleg whispered, looking intently at Vera. The silence stretched between them. "I think it's time for everyone to go to bed," Vera said, trying to lighten the mood. "Of course, get some rest. You've had a tough day," Oleg replied, wishing her good night. The next morning, Vera woke up early and saw Oleg leaving in his new car. She decided to familiarize herself with her upcoming work tasks but first needed to shower and have breakfast. Descending the stairs, she found Marina sitting at the table. "Oh, it's you again!" Marina exclaimed. "Listen, sweetheart. This dining area is for the homeowners, not the staff. Oleg took you in temporarily for work, so please eat with the servants and don't ruin our appetite." Vera hesitated, then quietly retreated to the kitchen, confirming her suspicions about Marina. The cook prepared coffee and sandwiches for Vera, who took them to her room, deciding to have breakfast there. The encounter with Oleg's fiancée had left a bitter taste, but immersing herself in work helped distract her. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The maid brought in large bags and placed them by the bed. "Here you go," she said cheerfully before quickly leaving. The bags contained Vera's belongings from Dennis's house. She was overjoyed, having mentally bid farewell to them, planning to gradually replace everything. As she sorted through her things, her phone rang. "Hello?" she heard Oleg's familiar voice. "I hope all your things are there?" "Hello? How did you manage this?" Vera asked, astonished. "It was nothing. I just called your former director and told him to pack your things, or else I'd make sure he was fired," Oleg explained with a laugh. "Thank you so much," Vera said, imagining Dennis's face at that moment. Oleg wished her a good day and hung up. Vera arranged her belongings and continued working. She only looked up from her computer screen when it started to get dark outside, and she heard voices downstairs. Looking out the window, she saw Oleg escorting Marina to the car. Marina was dressed in a beautiful evening gown, her hair elegantly styled. They looked like the perfect couple. Vera watched as Oleg carefully helped Marina into the car, never once glancing up at the window where Vera stood. Feeling hungry, she went down to the kitchen. The maid, Tanya, and the cook, Aunt Nadia, were finishing their dinner. They invited Vera to join them. "The boss asked me to tell you to be ready tomorrow morning. You'll be going to the doctor," Tanya said. Vera nodded, savoring a bite of chicken. "Aunt Nadia, you're a kitchen queen. This is delicious," she complimented. "Oh, Vera, thank you, dear. But not everyone is happy. The mistress has been nitpicking everything," Tanya explained. "First it's the soup, then the presentation, and now the breakfasts are driving me crazy. When the master lived alone, he was always satisfied. But ever since that witch moved in, no one can please her," Aunt Nadia complained. Vera shared a recipe for her famous pancakes, hoping to ease Aunt Nadia's burden. After chatting a bit more, she returned to her room. Oleg and Marina returned home after midnight. Vera, still awake and working, heard the car pull up. She knew Marina was cheating on Oleg but decided not to interfere. The next morning, Vera got ready for her doctor's appointment. She applied subtle makeup, styled her long hair, and dressed in classic trousers and a blouse, not forgetting her heels. She hurried to the kitchen to help Aunt Nadia as promised. Soon, a plate of fragrant pancakes with her signature fruit sauce was ready. Vera enjoyed a cup of aromatic coffee, keeping an eye on the time to avoid making the driver wait. Oleg showered, dressed, and joined Marina in the living room. His head was pounding from the previous night's outing. Surprised? What made you get up so early? Oleg asked. I decided we don't spend enough time together. Sharing meals brings us closer. Besides, after the wedding, we'll have to do this all the time. Marina replied. The word have grated on Oleg's ears. He sighed, sipping his coffee and eating a pancake. Where's Vera? Why isn't she here for breakfast? He asked. Don't you think the help should eat separately? Marina retorted. She's not the help. She saved my life, so she's a guest in my home. Oleg reminded her. And now? Am I supposed to tolerate this bumpkin? Marina snapped. Have you seen the ridiculous pajamas she wears? Only a country bumpkin would wear that to dinner in a decent home. I told her to eat with the staff and not bother us. Marina shouted, unable to control herself. Enough, Oleg said, slamming his hand on the table. This is my house, and I decide who sits at my table. If you don't like someone's company, eat elsewhere. He stormed into the kitchen, where Vera was chatting with the maid. She looked different today, her outfit accentuating her figure, and her makeup and hairstyle softening her features. Vera, let's go. I'll take you to the clinic myself, Oleg said. Vera followed him, surprised. Marina, still seated at the table, glared at Vera's transformation with envy. You look great, Oleg complimented as they got into the car. Vera smiled silently. The drive to the clinic took almost an hour, followed by a wait to see the doctor. After the examination, both were tired and hungry. The doctor said your wounds will heal soon, and you'll be back to normal, Oleg said happily. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done without you, Vera replied. Let's not dwell on it. I just returned the favor. Now let's grab some lunch. I'm starving, Oleg joked. They settled in a nearby cafe. Oleg ordered a full meal, while Vera opted for a light salad and juice. No wonder you're so skinny, Oleg laughed, comparing their portions. Their lunch turned into a work discussion, both feeling at ease. It's strange. We haven't known each other long, but it feels like I've known you forever, Oleg said, placing his hand over Vera's. You're like a breath of fresh air in my life. Why do you say that? You're a successful businessman. You have everything, Vera replied, her voice trembling. Oleg sighed. Let's go. There's something I want to show you. They arrived at a massive office building with several adjacent structures, resembling a mini-city. Do you like it? Oleg asked with a smile. Yes, but I don't quite understand, Vera admitted. What I have now came from my father's help, and he never misses a chance to remind me. I'm grateful for the start he gave me, but I want to prove to everyone, especially myself, that I'm capable of more. I've been thinking about launching my own media project, TV channels, an ad agency, and a publishing house. I have many ideas, and I want you to help me. No one else knows about this. I want it to stay a secret for now, Oleg explained. You mean Marina doesn't know either? Vera asked, shocked. No. She thinks money grows on trees, Oleg said bluntly. They spent more time there, planning and envisioning the future layout. By the time they returned home, it was already dinner time. Marina, watching them from the window, was seething with anger. Everything seemed to be falling apart before her eyes. Oleg had noticeably cooled towards her, and yet everything had seemed to be going so well. Marina rushed out to meet them, and Oleg and Vera entered the house. Throwing herself at him, she cooed, Darling, I missed you so much. I didn't have dinner without you. I'll arrange for it to be served right away. Vera, I hope you'll join us? Vera hesitated, then replied, I think I'd better grab a bite in the kitchen. Please join us, Oleg insisted. Vera nodded, unable to refuse him. She changed into her favorite pajamas and went downstairs for dinner. Everyone was already at the table, waiting for her. Glancing at Vera, Marina struggled to suppress a smirk, though it didn't go unnoticed. The staff served the meal. Nadezhda, I'd like those delicious pancakes we had this morning for breakfast tomorrow. They reminded me of my childhood, Oleg said with a smile. Oleg Sergeyevich, with pleasure. But it wasn't me who made them, it was our dear Vera, the cook explained. Really? Oleg looked at Vera in surprise. You're full of talents. Great cooking on top of everything else. Vera blushed modestly. You're exaggerating. We never had servants, so my grandmother and I often baked treats for tea. I love the smell of fresh baking in the house. It adds a cozy, warm feeling. But I didn't like the pancakes. They were too greasy and full of calories. You should cut back on the baking, Vera, or you'll turn into a blimp, Marina said sarcastically. The staff left for the kitchen, and those at the table finally began to eat, continuing their conversation. Vera ate in silence while Oleg and Marina talked. Vera, where did you buy that ridiculous pajama set? Every time I see you in it, I can't help but laugh, Marina said with a nasty chuckle. This was a gift from someone very dear to me, so it's precious. Unlike you, I come from a simple family where comfort was valued more than showy outfits and pretense, Vera replied. I think I'll go, I'm feeling a bit tired, Vera said, quickly leaving the room. Why do you always pick on her? Aren't you tired of it? Oleg asked. I was just asking. I can't stand these provincial manners, Marina retorted. Really? And have you forgotten that I, too, come from a small town? Maybe you want to laugh at me, too. Oleg raised his voice. Vera has an excellent education, great work experience, and a kind heart. What do you have? Maybe you want to trade me in for this provincial girl? Now everything is clear. You'll regret this, Marina shouted, storming out of the room. Oleg didn't sleep in his bedroom that night. He stayed in the living room. Vera was on his mind constantly. Being with her was easy and comfortable. He could be himself. And more than that, he was incredibly drawn to her. They had spent a lot of time together recently, and he realized she wasn't just a passing figure in his life. The next morning, Oleg woke up with a heavy head, compounded by a call from his father, who demanded a meeting. The day promised to be eventful. Lately, interactions with his father brought nothing but criticism and complaints. That's why Oleg decided to start his own business from scratch, but no one was supposed to know about it yet except Vera. She was the only one he could trust. Lately, Vera seemed like a ray of light in his seemingly gray life. They spent more time together, and with each passing day, Oleg felt her pulling him in stronger. Her simplicity, sincerity, and immense work ethic amazed him. She had immersed herself in the new project, breathing life into it and offering numerous interesting ideas. After quickly drinking some coffee, Oleg headed to his father's office. The massive building in the city center stood out prominently among other business centers. His father loved ostentation, unlike Oleg, who preferred simplicity. What's the urgency? Oleg asked, entering the spacious office. I'll get straight to the point. Marina called me yesterday, complaining, his father said, pausing and looking at Oleg questioningly. Ah, I see. Oleg smirked. And you decided to play matchmaker and mediator, is that it? Don't be smart. Your future is important to me. If you're making mistakes, who will guide you if not your own father? And don't you think it's a bit late for parenting? Oleg replied angrily. I'm not that little boy you abandoned, the one who needed you the most back then. I'm old enough to make my own decisions now. Don't be rude, son. Marina is the perfect match for you. Her father's connections will open many doors for us. Besides, the girl is head over heels in love with you. What more could you want? And what's this story about some stray you brought into your home? Oleg looked his father straight in the eyes and, barely containing his anger, said, Vera is not a stray, She's an intelligent and decent girl, far better than any of you. And who I'd bring into my home is my decision alone. He stood up and headed for the door, turning around in the doorway. I hope we understand each other. With that, he left his father's office, feeling miserable. He didn't want to see anyone, almost anyone. He got in his car and drove to the site of his new project, where Vera was already hard at work. She was full of enthusiasm. Oleg saw her bend over papers and couldn't help but admire her. Amazing, he thought. Only with her did he feel comfortable, especially lately. He made 2 cups of coffee and knocked on the office door. Vera smiled. You can come in without knocking, you're the boss. You were so engrossed, I didn't want to startle you. Besides, you've dived into the work so much that it seems like you're the one in charge, not me. Oleg laughed. After finishing their coffee, they discussed work details. Vera reported that she had found several excellent specialists, including some from her previous workplace. She also arranged a meeting with representatives of a firm that would supply the necessary equipment. I've also thought about the office space design and prepared some sketches for you to look at, Vera said, handing him a folder. You're amazing! I swear, you're a godsend. Oleg approached Vera, taking her hands in his. She remained silent, and so did he, unable to take his eyes off her lips. The urge to kiss her was overwhelming, but he held back, fearing her reaction. Suddenly, his phone rang loudly from his pocket. He answered it, stepping away to the window. From his pale face and worried voice, Vera knew something was wrong. His mother was in trouble, the hospital had called, and he needed to go there immediately. Of course, if she needed help. Vera didn't finish her sentence. I want you to be with me, please, Oleg said, taking her hand. She nodded and grabbed her coat, following him. The journey to their destination took quite a while. Although winter was coming to an end, the weather was still harsh. Heavy snowfall had covered the roads, paralyzing traffic in some areas. Oleg's phone rang several times, but he declined each call. They arrived at the hospital late at night and went straight to the attending physician, who informed them about Oleg's mother's heart attack. After explaining the situation, the doctor allowed them to visit in the morning, as the woman was conscious. There's no point in driving back. The roads are completely snowed in, Oleg said to his companion. We'll spend the night at my mother's apartment, if you don't mind. Vera didn't mind. She couldn't imagine her life without him anymore. Strangely, not long ago, she thought she loved Dennis, but now. She tried to push thoughts of Oleg away, knowing he had a fiancé, but it was no use. When he was near or touched her, every cell in her body responded. She liked everything about him: his velvety deep voice, his scent, his smile, and his eyes. With Dennis, she had never felt such an incredible pull, not even at the beginning of their relationship. But then again, what did she know? She was just a naive girl when she met Dennis and had never been in a serious relationship before. In the apartment building where Oleg's mother lived, there was a 24-hour supermarket where they stopped to buy some food. The small apartment was incredibly cozy and clean, which Vera noticed immediately. Oleg quickly changed into casual clothes that suited him perfectly. A simple t-shirt and shorts flattered his figure. Vera admired him, trying not to give herself away, though her heart raced with each passing moment. The apartment was filled with photos of Oleg from various moments in his life. As Vera settled in, he began preparing a hearty dinner. Oleg, if it's okay, I'd like to take a shower, Vera shyly asked. Of course, the bathroom is over there, he pointed. But I don't have any spare clothes. I doubt anything from my mom's closet will fit you. He smiled. Maybe my t-shirt will do. You're so petite, it'll be like a dress on you. While Vera was in the shower, she grew even more anxious, realizing they would spend the night alone together. What am I thinking? I'm already living in his house, though there are people around, but here, we're completely alone. Her thoughts raced. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel with Oleg's t-shirt on, dinner was ready. Oleg froze, seeing Vera in the doorway, flushed from the shower. You look great in my clothes, he finally said, unable to look away. It smells delicious. Vera tried to ease the tension. I'm not sure if it's edible, but we don't have much choice. Oleg smiled. Surprisingly, everything was delicious. During dinner, the tension eased slightly. Oleg shared stories about the years he spent living in this apartment with his mother. For some reason, he felt compelled to talk about their complicated relationship with his father and his childhood dreams. Vera listened attentively, not interrupting. Oleg opened up to her in a way he never had before. After dinner, Oleg showed her photo albums, sharing stories behind each photo. You were lucky. You had a wonderful childhood and a great mom, Vera said thoughtfully. Cherish her, because family and loved ones are the most precious things in life. I would give anything to have my loved ones by my side, but sadly, that's impossible. A tear rolled down Vera's cheek. Oleg gently wiped it away. She looked so vulnerable at that moment. He wanted to hold her close and never let anyone hurt her again. Instead, he suddenly leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was filled with tenderness and passion, which they both struggled to contain. Vera responded to the kiss. It felt like the world stood still. Oleg scooped her up and carried her to his bedroom, never stopping the kiss. Gently laying her on the bed, he asked, Are you sure you want this? Say the word, and I'll stop. His husky voice drove her wild. She silently wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him in response. That night was theirs alone. The intimacy wasn't just physical, it felt like their souls had merged. Waking up the next morning, Oleg looked at Vera sleeping on his shoulder. She was even more beautiful in her sleep. He hadn't slept much, spending the night thinking. He decided to end things with Marina. After last night, it was foolish to continue their meaningless relationship. He realized he had fallen for Vera and couldn't live without her. His phone, lying on the table, vibrated. Trying not to wake Vera, Oleg went to the kitchen, closing the door behind him. But as soon as he left, she opened her eyes, mentally replaying the events of the previous night. She wanted to scream with joy. Putting on the t-shirt, she was about to leave the room but paused at the door, overhearing snippets of the conversation. Marina, stop it! Mom is in the hospital. I'll come tomorrow or the day after, as soon as she's out of danger. Oleg hung up, and Vera shrank back, realizing she was just a fling for a man about to get married. The morning was tense. After breakfast, they headed to the hospital. Oleg first visited the attending physician, then they went to his mother's room. The woman was weak but happy to see her son. When Vera tried to leave them alone, the woman said, You're glowing, son. I'm so glad you've finally found love. Oleg held her hand and smiled. They spent 2 more days together until the doctor assured them his mother was out of danger. Early the next morning, they returned home. I'll talk to Marina today. I'll explain that we need to break up, Oleg said as they entered the house. But Marina was already waiting in the living room, immediately throwing herself into his arms, saying how much she missed him. She cast a disdainful glance at Vera before kissing Oleg passionately. Vera hurried to her room but soon heard a loud thud. It was Marina. You want to steal my fiancé? It won't work. No, why? I'm pregnant. Our baby, understand? Everything was perfect until you showed up. I think you get the picture. With that, Marina stormed out of the room, leaving Vera shocked. 2 hours later, Vera's belongings were packed, and she was waiting for a taxi. Suddenly, someone touched her shoulder. Vera! She heard the familiar, pain-filled voice. Don't, Oleg, don't say anything. I have to go. Marina is right. I'm the third wheel, and it's better for everyone this way. A baby is sacred, and I would never interfere with that. Vera's voice trembled. I'm sorry it turned out this way. I didn't know, truly. But I want to be with you. Oleg looked at her with hope. I'm sorry I have to go, the taxi is waiting. Don't worry, I won't stop working on developing your company, but it's better if we don't see each other. It will be easier for both of us. Vera turned away and headed to the taxi. Oleg stood watching the car drive away, taking his happiness with it. He could have left Marina, supported her and the baby financially, But he knew Vera wouldn't approve of that decision and wouldn't accept him. Vera moved back into her apartment, which her tenants had recently vacated. From morning till late evening, she worked tirelessly, gradually getting the business up and running and solving numerous issues. She kept herself busy to avoid having too much free time. Oleg, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about her. Through work contacts, he knew a lot about Vera and kept tabs on her life. He knew she was highly respected and valued by all her colleagues. It couldn't be any other way. Being at home was sometimes unbearable. Marina was unpleasant to be around, and only the thought of the baby kept him by her side. Their wedding was scheduled for the following month, but he tried not to think about it. Every night, he dreamed of Vera, and in those dreams, they were happy together. One evening, feeling particularly lonely, Oleg decided to visit Ilya to distract himself. The apartment door was slightly ajar, so he let himself in. Hearing the voices of two men, one of whom was Ilya, the other vaguely familiar, he paused. "And what are you offering me? If you weren't such an idiot, everything would have gone as planned." "Blowing up the car, that was brilliant!" Ilya shouted. "And what was I supposed to do? You promised money, but there was none. Besides, all these inspections started, and he would have figured it out soon enough. And who would have been blamed? You, of course, would have been off the hook, but me, I asked you to wait a little longer. He trusts me completely. But we had to act carefully. After the car incident, he started keeping a close eye on everything and controlling every detail. I had to lay low," Ilya said. "Great. And now, after all the inspections, I'll be kicked out. Marinka left me. And she's pregnant with my child. But she said she won't be with a penniless loser. And this naive Oleg believed her when she said the baby was his. Love, huh? But money talks. In short, either you pay me right now, or I'll go and tell him what a great friend you are." Oleg entered the room. Both men froze in shock. Ilya's companion turned out to be Denis, Vera's ex-husband. "I truly considered you a friend, almost a brother," Oleg said to Ilya. "What a shame." He kicked Marina out that very evening. The next morning, his father called, threatening to take the company away if he didn't change his mind. "Go ahead, I'm tired of your control. I don't want to see any of you anymore. We'll hand over everything tomorrow." With that, Oleg hung up the phone, grabbed his car keys, and drove to a familiar address. Vera opened the door immediately. "I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. Marina isn't pregnant by me, and I can't live without you." Vera stood silently, tears streaming down her face.